That's right folks, we are back again with some more Dinotopian hijinks, and this time, like Jamiroquai, we are going deeper underground. In my original Dinotopia video, I spoke a bit about some of the utopian aspects of Dinotopian society, and how it contrasted with the way that us stupid Homo sapiens have constructed a late-stage capitalist hellscape, complete with impending climate doom. The Dinotopians had managed to create a collective understanding of responsibility, both for each other and for the environment in which they live. And this has meant that the vast majority of those on the island bought into the philosophy we discussed in the first video, where they were prioritising equality, fairness and well-being above progress, growth and profit. However, there were signs that even Dinotopia have been employing a bit of propaganda, with sightings of a pre-Dinotopian civilization and legends of a subterranean history either covered up or deliberately forgotten. At the end of the first book, we saw Arthur Denison returning from their own expedition into the dark underbelly of Dinotopia's past, and in this follow-up, returning artist and author James Gurney threatens to show us the wonders and terrors of a forgotten past as we explore the world beneath. Grab yourself a torch and pack your bags. We're going subterranean. The book opens with Arthur's son Will piloting a mechanical aircraft of Arthur's creation, a sort of steam-powered dragonfly over Waterfall City. Very quickly the test flight goes pear-shaped, and Will ends up having to fling himself onto the back of his skyback Cirrus, who rescues the young man and returns him to the safety of solid ground. We discover that Arthur was inspired to try and build this contraption by the things he saw whilst on his expedition in the first book, as well as his seemingly rekindled interest in leaving Dinotopia and elevating humanity above the need to ask the Dinotopians for help. Arthur reveals in conversations with Will that steam power alone would not be sufficient for someone to leave Dinotopia, given its choppy seas and whipping winds, but that he believes there might be a more powerful source of energy in the world beneath, if he could just get past a huge pair of locked doors which barred him from going further in his first expedition. It is for this reason that Arthur wants to return to the caverns and seek a way past this barrier, albeit this time properly prepared and funded. Arthur attends a meeting with the Waterfall City elders to discuss sending another expedition, and explains his findings so far to a number of highly respected dinosaurs and humans before making the case for further investigation. He shows off a sunstone that he had found in the first trip, and Nalab, the city's assistant librarian, recognises it immediately. Nalab explains that Dinotopian legends talk of an ancient civilization led by King Ogthar, who was half human, half dinosaur, who discovered the sunstones and built a civilization based on their power. He reached into the sun's bed and plucked out a number of shining stones, along with a ruby-coloured stone of a special power. He brought them to his beloved city of Poseidus, where they brought the very light of day to the streets of the city. Ogthar also brought back a nest of golden eggs which hatched into giant metallic creatures. These creatures wore the stones as jewels and received life from them. Nalab continues. The story says the sea grew angry at Ogthar for disturbing its rest with needless noise and light. In its wrath, the sea rose up and drowned the city. Arthur explains about the huge doors that stopped his progress, and that he seems to have found one half of the key needed to get through, but that he needs to find the other. There is a somewhat mixed response from those present, but a slight majority seem to agree that seeking out the key is the right thing to do, and before long rumours fill Waterfall City of the need for the other half of this special key. As a result of the spreading rumours, many citizens approach Waterfall City's Civic Hall with an assortment of artefacts and keys in the hope of playing a part in the coming expedition, but most are turned away along with their trinkets until there appears a musician by the name of Oriana Nescava. Oriana reveals a half key that fits perfectly to Arthur's, but she also reveals that the whole key once belonged to her family, and that access beyond the doors is her birthright. She explains that she will share the key half so long as she is able to join Arthur, which leads to him inserting his foot fully into his mouth. "My dear girl, I can't take you along. I'm afraid this is not a trip for, ladies." Bix sputtered a note of protest, prompting Oriana to say with some amusement, "Isn't Bix a lady? Didn't she save your life on the last expedition?" Somewhat embarrassed, Arthur replied shortly, "Very well, Miss Nascava, you may come." Arthur goes on to suggest they would need a guide and submarine pilot, and in steps returning pantomime villain Lee Crabbe, who volunteers to fill that role. In the absence of other candidates, the braggart and dinosaur racist reluctantly gets the nod. After a rather lively raft journey down the cargo chutes to the docks, Lee Crabbe reveals that he doesn't technically own a submarine just at the minute, but that he knows a man that does. We all know a guy like this, don't we? Crabbe meets a friend in a Discworld-looking wharfside inn and goes on to beat him in a wager, winning access to a sub and granting them the means to start the adventure in earnest. To speed up this underwater part of the journey, they enlist the help of a Chronosaurus in towing the submarine to the entrance of the underwater caverns. This clever ploy backfires, however, as the Chronosaurus attracts the unsavoury attention of a hungry Dunkleostus. Indeed, the Dunkleostus chases off their escort and damages one of the sub's grabber arms before they're able to escape using the humble pedal power of their slightly shaken crew. As the journey continues, they pass over a graveyard of sunken ships and subs, and Crabbe's lust for treasure leads to a heated exchange with Arthur and Oriana, who remind him that they are not here to fill their pockets with gold. Finally, the sub surfaces inside a huge chamber, dominated by the two gigantic doors Arthur had spoken of before. They had made it. Arthur places the two halves of the key together and is able to start the opening mechanism on the doors, which then open to reveal an even larger chamber. No one had expected the view that opened before them, a shining landscape of glimmering pools and vast towers shaped by nature's hand. Whilst Arthur is off exploring the catacombs of ancient civilizations, his son Will and their childhood friend Sylvia are tasked with using their Skybax mounts to protect a convoy that is travelling through T-Rex territory. As discussed in the first book, the T-Rexes and a few other of the larger predators have rejected the rules of Dinotopian society and instead created their own culture, which sometimes brings them into conflict with the Dinotopians, a situation that is largely accepted and tolerated by both sides as being part of their nature. Though to be fair, this conflict is a good excuse to see dinosaurs wearing armour, which just makes it all worthwhile in my opinion. We see the convoy reach a local village, and they are given some insight into the local legends and mythology, some of which acts as a sort of propaganda against the T-Rex, describing them as greedy and hungry, which I took personally since that is at least 50% of my personality. It is also here that we discover a young Triceratops hatchling that is suffering from some sort of affliction that can only be resolved by using a natural ingredient found only in, yep, you guessed it, T-Rex territory. Since they are headed through that way anyway, Will and Sylvia decide they'll keep an eye out for the plant the child needs. Whilst flying high on their escort mission, Will spots an ancient temple that bears iconography that seems to blend the humans and the dinosaur, much like that of the world underneath that Arthur had described previously. However, before they can gather too much information on the ground, a T-Rex attacks, and Will is saved once again by Cirrus in the nick of time, before returning to find the rest of the convoy under a concerted attack. Returning to the expedition, they now find themselves lost in huge crystalline caverns, and it is here that author and artist James Gurney starts to take us through the character motivations, with Lee Crabbe bemoaning the lack of saleable treasure, Oriana talking of the caverns' relation to her familial heritage, Arthur ruminating on the scientific method, and Bix regarding the caverns with a historical reverence for their importance in saving the Dinotopians from the extinction event that did for the rest of the Earth's dinosaurs. Crabbe and Bix share this exchange. "You've got us all lost in this devil dungeon. We'll all end up dead instead of rich," grumbled Crabbe. "This is no dungeon, Mr. Crabbe," said Bix, "unless you make it one. We dinosaurs respect the caverns because they saved our lives." Oriana and Arthur likewise discuss the importance of the caverns from their different perspectives. This is a place of death, but also of life. After passing through this darkness, one can emerge again as if being newly reborn. She came alongside Arthur. You, for example, Mr. Denison, you undertook this journey to begin your life again, didn't you? Me? Nonsense, Arthur said, rubbing his moustache and looking doubtfully at Oriana. It has nothing to do with me personally. I am only interested in the objective facts. The only thing that will be born here will be scientific understanding, and the only thing that will die will be myth and superstition. Myth will never die, said Oriana. It is the deepest kind of understanding. Oriana understands the cultural importance of mythology as a means for reinforcing values and preserving history via the art of storytelling, whereas Arthur is more concerned with passing facts from fiction in an objective manner, with both perhaps missing the value of the other's views. These differences in philosophy and perspective are further highlighted by a rock formation that each character interprets somewhat differently. Lee Crabbe's cynicism and tendency towards seeing the worst in others leads him to identify the rock formation as sinister and malevolent, whereas Oriana's familial and philosophical outlook sees instead a caring and motherly figure in the formation, perhaps indicative of their more harmonious relationship with the Earth itself and a more romantic worldview. Lee Crabbe represents for me the same kind of self-loathing, often reflective of more conservative viewpoints, where they measure their expectation of others by their own shortcomings, seeing their own greed, callousness and spite in the world around them, and judging us all by their own personal failings. The world is pretty scary if you think everyone is as much a bastard as you are. In the next chamber they discover a huge deposit of raw sandstones, the mythical power sources talked of in the legends of King Ogthar and Poseidus. The plants around them seem to glow and react to the sunstones as they move into a series of smaller caverns that are referred to as a labyrinth, finding yet more artifacts and carvings mentioning King Ogthar, and Bix explains that Ogthar is considered a half-human ceratopsian, also known as an anthroceratops. The name refers to a big family. We're known for the frills that adorn our heads. When you combine human and ceratopsian qualities, you get a race of creatures called anthroceratops, renowned for great powers of wisdom. Which half contributes to wisdom? Arthur asked. Never mind, don't tell me, he said, laughing. Perhaps the most compelling discovery awaits in the next chamber, however, as they discover an AT-AT leg. Well, not really an AT-AT, but still a gigantic mechanical leg all the same. Following the trail even further, it opens up into another huge chamber, complete with ancient canals, boats and buildings, suggesting an infrastructure and development far beyond any expectation. There are remnants everywhere of great historical artifacts and treasures that Lee Crabbe gladly scoops up, but it is the fleet of mechanical dinosaurs that catch Arthur's imagination. Look here, he called. A whole fleet of machines. They look as though they once could strut around under their own power. Strutters! Marvellous! Why were they abandoned? But why would anyone need such a thing when they have living dinosaurs around? Asked Oriana. Don't you see, said Arthur. This is the hope of progress. Machines made to serve mankind. Arthur eventually discovers that by attaching the sunstones they had found to specifically designed sockets on the surface of the machines, they were able to power up and pilot these mechanical monsters right out of the depths of the caves and out into the jungle of the surface. Hurrah! Freedom! The expedition is saved! At the surface, Arthur, Lee Crabbe, Bix and Oriana almost immediately encounter some dinosaurs from a vanguard unit that is moving ahead of the Dinotopian convoy, the one that Will and Sylvia are escorting. They advise that their expedition has surfaced in the middle of dangerous territory. Friends, you had better stay with us. The tyrannosaurs are angry here. Indeed, it is not long before they are ambushed by some of the big meat-eaters, and the head of Arthur's mechanical walker is ripped clean off in the melee. The headless strutter reared up on its back legs, flailing its front legs like a horse. For a moment the tyrannosaur blinked and stepped back. Arthur, get it going, Oriana shouted. I'm trying, he cried as he kicked it into gear and shoved the handles forward. Whilst all this is happening, Lee Crabbe casts Ninja Vanish and abandons the others using one of the mechanical walkers, whilst the Dinotopians of the vanguard tried to create a defensive line to protect their retreat. Despite being separated on the wrong side of the line, Arthur, Bix and Oriana are eventually able to escape by piloting the beheaded walker past the tyrannosaurs and then over a drawbridge to the jungle village of Balaba, where they catch up with the vanguard, the main convoy, the cowardly crab, and of course Will and Sylvia. The returning group is able to deliver the much-needed herbs to heal the baby Triceratops, and to reunite Arthur with Will, who discuss the findings of their very different but somewhat parallel adventures. Arthur is rather taken with his strutter, the now headless mechanical dinosaur, and discovers that it appears to have a rudimentary intelligence of its own, acting even without someone at the controls. With due respect to you dinosaurs, it travels for long distances, outruns tyrannosaurs, and needs no fuel other than the sun. But best of all, it seems to have a simple brain that endows it with coordination and volition. We then see Arthur's explanatory diagram of the strutter, making special notice of this intelligent element when discussing the sunstone mounting. As long as the sunstone remains in place, the strutter never completely comes to rest. It has long been the capitalist's dream to have access to labour that doesn't need to eat, drink or sleep, as we well know. Arthur also notes that this semi-sentient state has survived even after losing its head, though he does also remark that the great machine acts strangely and almost like a pet, giving examples of it drinking from a river to top off its cooling unit, or excitedly bounding to investigate people, and destroying everything in its path like a clumsy puppy. Where Arthur is fascinated by these machines and the possibilities for advancement, Oriana is distinctly not impressed, and the discussion goes like this. But don't you see the miracle of this ancient science, Oriana? These engineers created machines on the verge of life with real personalities. If we can tame them, harness them for the good of this island, we can bring back a golden age to Dinotopia, an age without vulgarity and drudgery. The golden age is here right now, said Oriana. You just don't see it. No engineer ever invented anything as miraculous as a flower or an egg or a living dinosaur. It's never drudgery to live among them. But you can't live like animals. What about the roof over your head and the shoes on your feet? Aren't those inventions? Yes, indeed. True conveniences. But for anything gained, something else is given away. I remember when I was a little barefoot girl, the day came to wear my first pair of shoes. The shoes protected my feet, but also separated me from the touch of the grass, in the same way the roof divides us from the stars. Later in the evening, the expedition, along with Will and Sylvia, work out that the reason for the T-Rex attack must be King Ogthar's lost treasures rest in the temple ruins that Will had discovered when on his flight, and that this area fell under the protection of the carnivores. However, no sooner had they come to this realization, they also discover that Lee Crab has clearly come to the same conclusion, as he has already absconded with Arthur's notebook and taken his strutter towards the temple. Pursuing Crab on their own strutter, the expedition is halted when they find two juvenile Gigantosauruses playing, with one of them becoming trapped by fallen trees. Spotting an opportunity to both assist these young creatures and ingratiate themselves to the local carnivores, Bix acts as a translator, and Arthur manages to help free the young carnivores, who in turn then lead them to meet their leader, the charmingly named Stinktooth. Arthur is rightly dubious about going to meet these full-size predators, but Bix explains that their culture, whilst different, is no less civilized. We don't have much choice but to go along, said Bix. But don't worry, bloodthirsty as they seem to outsiders, these creatures can be fiercely loyal, and they have a powerful sense of honour and justice. Because of your act of kindness, I believe we have just earned merit. This proves to be just so, with the gigantic Stinktooth treating them with a cautious respect, and making clear to all those present that this expedition was not to be harmed. A brief discussion of the expedition's purpose leads to Stinktooth agreeing to let them enter the temple ruins and see its contents, but with the warning that they take only what you can hold in your mind. Inside of the temple, which turns out to actually have been a royal tomb, it is fair to say that there is quite a lot of treasure, as well as many artefacts that appear to be ancient Egyptian in origin, though Bix quickly explains that the ancient Egyptians were in fact influenced by Dinotopian crafting, and that these artefacts predate even that ancient civilization. Arthur excitedly discovers an ancient form of camera, and examines a number of slides that detail the heights of this civilization, and indeed the downfall of King Ogthar and the city of Poseidus. But just as they are coming to terms with this amazing discovery, Lee Crabbe emerges from the shadows. Holding the legendary ruby sunstone as well as numerous other riches, he intends to use his strutter to leave the island, making a final offer to Arthur. You and I ship out together, and we find a buyer for all this fancy science. We split the profits 50-50, and then we build a fleet of attack strutters. The world would be ours, and we could come back and rid this island of scalies. Arthur declines, so Lee Crabbe uses his strutter to destroy Arthur's before making like a banana and splitting. Stinktooth carries Arthur after Lee Crabbe, whilst Will and Sylvia follow up on their skybaxes, all attempting to catch up to the thief. But Arthur was right. They simply aren't able to catch up with this mechanical marvel. Lee Crabbe hits the coast and heads out to sea, and Arthur makes one last desperate attempt to stop him. Leaping from Stinktooth's head, Arthur lands on Crabbe's strutter and wrenches free the ruby sunstone, launching it into the ocean and instantly incapacitating the strutter, and symbolically casting out the greed and material ambition that has long haunted our protagonist. Despite all that has happened, Arthur saves Crabbe from a watery grave, and they are both collected by rescue Skybax flyers. Arthur's notebook also escapes the sinking strutter, only to be discovered by a Filipino fisherman a few months later, leading it to it ending up in the same university library in which it is discovered by James Gurney in the first book. I liked that little wink to the fourth wall. A reminder that it is Arthur's journal we are reading, and that all of this is meant to be a historical record rather than a straight fantasy fiction piece. The final pages of the book essentially wrap everything up neatly. Arthur and Oriana fall in love, Will and Sylvia continue their adventures, Bix returns to their home comforts, and the story of their expedition becomes legend told from generation to generation. Another fine adventure, more lessons learned, and Dinotopia expands its cultural depth even further. But what else have we learned? Colonialism and collectivism. A big part of The World Beneath is driven by Arthur Denison's obsession with a very specific form of progress. Indeed, the whole expedition stems from Arthur's desire for a return to the old world and to gain the plaudits for discovering and documenting Dinotopia, seemingly driven by a desire for social and probably literal capital. Whilst it's true that at the end of the first book Arthur seemed to value discovery for its own sake, in The World Beneath, such thoughts were often quickly supplanted by a desire to be credited and recognised as the discoverer, to put his flag in the discovered, so that others would know it was him that found it. But of course, most of the time, the thing being flagged was already known about by the Dinotopians. So who is Arthur discovering things for? Well, it would appear that Arthur values the opinions and social capital of the world he knew before, as opposed to his current Dinotopian one, and this is indicative of a colonial mindset. Whilst Arthur enjoys his reputation on the island and the respect he is given there, he still measures everything by its potential value to people back in the old world, suggesting that Dinotopian opinions are just of a lesser value to him than those he considers his equal. In the same way that Columbus discovered the Americas, despite there being people already living there, the colonial mindset disregards the opinions and values of those it considers lesser, in search of recognition from those it recognises as peers, all in search of that tasty social capital from a society that matters to them. Over the course of the first book, we see Arthur seemingly come to terms with the fact that not only was life in Dinotopia better for his son Will, but that there was plenty of intellectual and social stimulation available to him if he were to commit to his life there. However, upon discovering the world beneath towards the end of the first book, the flame of ambition is seemingly lit again, and not just for the pursuit of new information for its own sake. Having survived his solo expedition at the end of that book, we open the world beneath with Arthur trying to build a flying machine in a world where people flew on Dinotopians, as a matter of course. Why would you bother trying to build some sort of steam-powered clockwork death trap? Well, It is because Arthur sees himself and the wider human race as being superior to the Dinotopians, and doesn't like that he needs them to be able to fly, to carry heavy payloads, or to be able to move quickly, and so he seeks to remove that dependence. I hope to see the day when people can travel freely, not only throughout this island but also across the ocean to the rest of the world. This obsession with removing codependency confuses Bix, who has the following conversation with Will after Arthur's flying machine fails and nearly kills Will. "Thanks, Bix, my father has some plans for me too. He says that someday I'll operate flying machines that will go faster and higher than any skybacks." "I'm glad he believes in you," said Bix. He has good reason to, but he might be putting too much faith in machines. Wonderful as they are, they have no judgment of their own. No heart, no sense, no love for you. The need for a more powerful fuel source and legends of superior technology lead Arthur to an expedition into the ancient underworlds of Dinotopia, exploring the ancient lands of Poseidus and of King Ogthar, the half-human, half-Dinotopian character of legend. In the course of doing so, Arthur is able to confirm that the mythical sunstones referenced in multiple ancient scrolls do in fact exist, and can function as a near limitless power source, and furthermore, that a huge number of mechanical vehicles exist that are built to utilise this resource already. These vehicles represent unnecessary technological progress, since they were built to solve a problem that seemingly didn't exist. But to Arthur, they are a way to reclaim his agency from the codependent societal structure of Dinotopia, and return to a system he is more used to, a system where he, as a rich white man, was sat firmly atop the pile. This is a personal philosophy that he shares with Lee Crabbe, who, whilst from more humble working class origins, still views himself as superior to the dinosaur races, othering them as scalies, and viewing their equality with him as both offensive in the extreme and a subversion of the natural order of his worldview. Indeed, Lee Crabbe may be the perfect encapsulation of an exploitative colonial mindset and of white supremacy, intending as he was to use the riches of a supposedly lesser nation in order to lift his own status back in the old world, and seeing no moral problem with raising himself up on the backs of others, for two main reasons. Firstly, he has internalised the logic of capitalism, that we are all in competition and that focusing on your own interest and well-being is not just necessary but ideologically correct, allowing him to swindle, con and exploit with no moral compunction. That's just the way it is. It's dog eat dog, best man wins, blah blah blah, and all that Randian pish that Maggie and Big Ron were pushing in the 80s. Secondly, he sees the Dinotopians as being just as hierarchically minded as he is, and that he is simply trying to redress the balance as a white cishet man by returning to the top of the food chain, and he uses this to justify any action he takes. Here's my bargain. You and I ship out together and we find a buyer for all this fancy science. We split the profits 50-50 and then we build a fleet of attack strutters. The world would be ours, and we could come back and rid this island of scalies. It is only when Arthur rejects Crabbe's offer to escape the island and to use the materials that had been stolen to enrich his own self that he's able to move past his colonial background, helping to ground Lee Crabbe and abandon plans for a mechanical workforce that would have replaced the need for Dinotopian labour and potentially created a labour crisis. In fact, about that, machine and soul. Now, when I say machine and soul, I am not talking about the critically panned 1992 album from Gary Newman. Bit harsh, I think. There's some fun stuff on there, but I digress. When I say machine and soul, I mean the different perspectives on progress in Dinotopia. Those that see machines and technological progress as the path to utopia, and those that think utopia is found through cooperation and collectivism instead. One of these mindsets is represented by Arthur and Lee Crabbe, who see the world via its potential for progress, albeit personal for Lee and technological for Arthur. The other mindset is represented by Oriana and Bix, who believe that technological progress for its own sake is a distraction from the things that really matter, and that it is how we treat each other that will determine the measure of a society. The world beneath starts with Arthur nearly killing Will by putting him in an experimental flying machine. The same Will, of course, that makes a living flying on a Skybax, a faster, more agile, and, let's be real, more reliable flying creature. Indeed, it is Will's Skyback's partner Cirrus that ultimately saves Will from a death among the twisted, burning wreckage of the failed machine and Arthur's hubris. Arthur's whole attitude is confusing for Bix, who sees this pursuit as a pointless endeavour, as she explains to Will. He might be putting too much faith in machines. Wonderful as they are, they have no judgment of their own. No heart, no sense, no love for you. Stay with your Skybacks. This ideological conflict is exacerbated when they discover the mechanical structures in the world beneath that represent a technological level beyond anything experienced by those alive. These strutters were effectively solar-powered, semi-sentient vehicles capable of great feats of strength and speed that previously only certain Dinotopian species were able to match. Arthur is fascinated both by the strutters' potential to unshackle humanity from relying on Dinotopian labour and the specific technological advancements involved in their creation, whereas Lee Crab sees their power as a means to lift his own status and allow him to dominate and eliminate his enemies. Oriana sees them as relics of an older time and of a society picking the wrong priorities. Her position is that the strutters should be treated as items of historical significance and part of the living history of Dinotopia, but not its future. Why would anyone need such a thing when they have living dinosaurs around? Asked Oriana. Don't you see, said Arthur. This is the hope of progress. Machines made to serve mankind. Finally, we have Bix, who sees the strutters as a sort of confusing affront to Dinotopians, an unnecessary attempt to replace dinosaur labour with automated workers that have no agency or will. The strutters' agility impressed Arthur. He turned to Bix and said thoughtlessly, "Aren't these better than dinosaurs?" "I'm sure they're more considerate than humans," she muttered. It is only when Arthur sees how Lee Crab intends to use this technology to dominate others and potentially eradicate the Dinotopians that he finally starts to realise the dangers these machines could represent. Whether we want to paint the parallels between Einstein's discoveries and the eventual creation of the atomic bomb, or to examine the dangers we face in capital's headlong pursuit of AI technology at all costs, there is a warning here. We too must ask ourselves, do we seek technology to improve society, or just to please the few that might benefit? Different perspectives. The Skull Rock. I just wanted to touch on this fun little moment during the expedition, as it provides an example of how your personal experience and worldview can shape the way you see things. The gathered explorers come across a curious rock formation, and James Gurney takes the time to show us how it looks in reality, how it looks to the scientific mind of Arthur, the cynical mind of Lee Crab, and to the more optimistic Oriana, before Bix as ever adds her wisdom to proceedings. "We all find what we expect to find," said Bix, "as long as we see with our hearts as much as with our eyes." So we see the rock formation as it is, an admittedly interesting natural phenomena, which Arthur describes thusly. It's a typical calcite formation. He touched the glistening surface. Do you see how the water drips here? It has been dripping here for countless centuries. Each droplet contains a tiny bit of dissolved limestone. The effect of millions of droplets over time has been to create this random accretion following the laws of chance. We then switch to Lee Crab, whose cynical and negative worldview distorts the rock into a scary and malign shape that reflects his belief that the natural world is against him and that he must seek to dominate it by force. "You say it's chance," said Crab, narrowing his eyes at the formation. "I say it's plain bad luck, flat and simple. Do you see what it is? It's the skull of a dead man bugging his eyes at us." Straight away, Oriana fires back, with her more romantic and optimistic opinion as the rock formation shifts to become something entirely different in her eyes. "How can you say that?" said Oriana. "There's no skull, it's clearly a woman holding her baby with two other children beside her." It's a very short aside in the cave exploration part of the story, and there isn't much more to talk about really. But I wanted to include it, as James Gurney has demonstrated how your ideology shapes how you interpret the world around you, and how your biases shape and reinforce themselves by bending reality to fit your pre-existing expectations. There is an important message here about the importance of seeing things as they are and not allowing ourselves to be blinded by our biases or manipulated by those that can shape the world around us. Crime and Punishment, Lee Crabbe. One of the fascinating things we learn about Dinotopian society in this book is how they deal with crime. In the first book, we learn that the citizens of Dinotopia don't allow people, or dinosaurs, to go hungry. They find homes for the homeless, and they do not tolerate violence or oppression. This largely means that crimes of necessity aren't really discussed, since their comprehensive social safety net removes desperation as a possible motivation for crime. Lee Crabbe, however, represents something different. He does not like having to work with or for dinosaurs, and it is Lee that we hear refer to them via the racial slang of scalies. He harbours a desire for the accumulation of wealth and power, and to elevate himself above everyone else, and this desire is strong enough that it makes him capable of endangering others, abandoning his comrades, and stealing revered artefacts. At the climax of the book, with Lee Crabbe heading into the sea with his stolen strutter and collection of treasures and legendary sunstones, Arthur is able to disable the vehicle by removing the ruby sunstone. The heavy mechanical strutter starts to sink immediately, and I wondered whether Lee Crabbe might be entombed at the bottom of the ocean, along with his stolen treasures, as a sort of morally poetic but dark lesson. It would make a certain amount of narrative sense had he died dragged down by technology and wealth, but with neither able to save him. However, I then remembered that this was a book aimed at kids, and Arthur heroically pulls Crabbe from the cockpit and saves his life. What, then, would become of the treacherous Lee Crabbe? Crabbe had lost a little of his swagger, but none of his salt. He was placed under the watch of two spike-headed wardens, who followed his every movement both day and night. What can we learn from this? Firstly, despite the severe nature of Crabbe's crimes, there is seemingly no consideration given to capital punishment. This might not be too surprising given Dinotopian society's aversion to violence, though one imagines it would have been a very different story if his fate had been decided by the carnivore-led society. There's no flogging, no stocks, no tarring and feathering, no physical punishment at all. The idea of an eye for an eye style justice does not appear to be held in Dinotopia, and we can probably extrapolate that they correctly understand that strict punishments are not effective deterrents. Secondly, there does not appear to be any concept of imprisonment, or the physical denial of liberty beyond the spike-headed escort that follows him around. This suggests that Dinotopians do not believe crime, or poor decision-making for that matter, can be resolved by incarceration, or that punishing criminals does anything to improve the lives of their victims. The three arguments for imprisonment are generally: 1. That it punishes the criminal, acting as a deterrent and inflicting harm upon them in the name of justice and the victim. 2. It provides a place to reform the criminal and prepare them for lawful reintegration upon release. And 3. It protects society by literally and physically removing the harmful elements from the streets. I think we are able to assume that Dinotopia is not interested in the first functionality. But do they believe in that second one? Do they believe in rehabilitation? They certainly seem to have given up on trying to convert the carnivores to their style of life, and accepted that it is against their nature to live that way. Does this mean that they perhaps believe that Lee Crabbe behaving in a more respectful or collective-minded way would be against his nature? We do not know exactly what is planned for Lee Crabbe beyond the imminent future, so perhaps there will be an attempt to re-educate. But if that is deemed to fail, what then? We can only speculate. Though with the T-Rexes, once it was established that they couldn't be trusted to behave appropriately, they were banished beyond the city walls. Just saying. The third reasoning for prisons is in order to protect people by removing dangerous individuals from the streets, and this is something they consider important, as they have assigned Lee Crabbe 2 wardens that travel with him everywhere. They are not seemingly asked to restrict his activities or to actively punish him, but seem to serve as a method for ensuring that he is unable to hurt society any further. I think we can rule out a rehabilitative element to this punishment, since they know that Crab will resent his new companions and will view it as a more tangible element of the enslavement that he believes he already experiences. Now, I've done a lot of speculating there based on a single sentence, and maybe in later Dinotopia content there is more talk of the fate of Lee Crab that might inform us further on Dinotopian justice. But if we can't make random speculation on insufficient evidence, then what is YouTube even for? In his first book, James Gurney introduces us to a utopian vision of a dinosaur society, then slowly begins to reveal the edges where the shine has become tarnished, hinting at ancient civilizations, carnivorous rebels, and accusations of slavery. The world beneath takes us further underneath the sheen of the great civilization to learn more about its past, and perhaps why it has developed the way it has. Their seemingly universal apprehension around technological progress and their repeated assertions that machines lack heart and soul suddenly make more sense when you realise that there is a whole mythology that talks of a fallen civilization buried under the weight of its own hubris, and that its pursuit of power and growth for its own sake led to this result. These themes underpin Arthur's journey from someone seemingly still torn between the prestige and ambition of a colonial and capitalist society and the harmonious existence offered by a collectivist and sustainably focused Dinotopian one. Lee Crab exists as the natural example of the former mindset and provides one end of the spectrum, opposite the more Dinotopian sympathetic views of Oriana, Will and Biggs. These character archetypes provide an entertaining way of exploring these points of view in a way that is easily understandable, and of demonstrating the weaknesses of self-enrichment as a motivation. Dinotopian society has existed for as long as it has precisely because they have managed to balance the integrity and welfare of the individual with the sustainability and welfare of the wider civilization. And obviously I would say that because I'm a lefty and this aligns with the views that come with that. But we live in a world where the economic powerhouses have largely run with a philosophy focused on individuality above community, where we are told that if we all just pursue selfish ambition, everything will work out for everyone, or at least most people anyway. We are told that if we work hard, we can build the lives we should aspire to, full of material possessions, luxury and privilege, and by extension, we understand the implication that if you are poor, it is because you haven't worked hard enough or made the right decisions. Of course, as we get older, we start to understand that this system can only exist by exploiting others, and that for one person to have everything, many must have nothing. Under capitalism, we can't all be rich, we can't all be comfortable. We can't all have a yacht, we can't all have a mansion, and we can't all have the latest phone console and clothes. Furthermore, our planet can't sustain that kind of consumption. It is already on the cusp of climate collapse. We are running short of many key materials, and the disparity between the wealthiest and the poorest is growing at an ever faster rate. Perhaps the most important lesson we can learn from Dinotopia is that material possessions can't replace relationships with our peers, that individual comforts are temporary and can't fix the alienation we feel from those around us, and that the only way we can really all win is if we prioritise our shared well-being and build a future together based on respect, kindness and sustainability. Thank you all for watching and for coming on this second trip to Dinotopia. Hopefully you've enjoyed our time together, and we'll give this video a like and maybe drop a comment on what you have taken from the Dinotopia series. Thanks to Mrs. Inside Left for their ongoing help and support, to Advent Song and Leech Comforts for their music, to the We Create Together group for their ongoing advice and camaraderie, and of course to James Gurney for building this world we all get to enjoy. Stay safe, be brave, and be kind, comrades. See you soon.